Hello, I'm trying here to be alive again. Had a few little bit of issues. Anybody there? All right, it says here that you're live and we are building an audience. All right, had a little bit of a technical issues on trying to get this Facebook Live thing going today. That's one of the frustrations, I should say, of new technology and my first time of actually attempting to do this. So we'll just give it a couple of minutes just to thank you for showing up, and whether you're going to be watching this live with me here or if you're going to be able to hear this as a repost. I appreciate the time that you're going to take to listen to this. It is an investment. It is an investment of time, and so I really want to be able to give you some good content about this class. As far as the title that I use, again, is The Mindset of Happiness and Joy. And to start off, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean by happiness and joy. I'm not talking about the happiness and joy. Hi, Kathy. I see someone joined finally. Nice to see you, Kathy. But talking about the title of this broadcast is The Mindset of Happiness and Joy. And a lot of times people wonder what I mean by happiness and joy. And I'm not talking about happiness and joy. Hey, Jeff. I'm not talking about happiness and joy as in smiley happy and entertainment happiness or fun joy. In other words, I can have a lot of joy on a wave runner. But what I'm going to be talking to you about today and through this series of this next 8 weeks is the happiness that's, the way I would explain it, is the sense of well-being. It's the sense that things are okay. That no matter what the circumstances is, the feeling of just okayness, and there is a happiness. There is also a peace of mind that I think is a very important component. To begin off, I always like to start off with telling you a little story about what's called the Semmelweis reflex. Now, what the Semmelweis reflex is, and probably some of you have heard of it, some of you haven't. I don't know if anybody's heard of the Semmelweis reflex, but here it is. It is a metaphor for the reflex-like action or tendency to reject new evidence or knowledge because it contradicts established norms, beliefs, or paradigms. Now, the reason why I bring this up, and you're going, well, why would I bring this up? Is because as we're going through and exploring this understanding of happiness and joy and the mindset of it, there may be a few things that are going to go against your already beliefs and the paradigms that you're, or maybe even living in. I know it went against some of mine when I got this understanding and started learning more about this understanding. But who is Semmelweis reflex and why is it called that? Well, Semmelweis, his name is Ignaz Semmelweis, is who it's named after. And Ignaz Semmelweis lived in the 1800s. He lived he was born in 1818 and he died in 1868. And he was a physician, a doctor. I believe he was Hungarian. And he worked in Vienna in a hospital in the early 1800s. And when he was in that hospital, there was two different wings of the hospital. There was the surgical side and then there was the midwife side. And at that time, women who gave birth had a high rate of mortality of dying of basically a peripheral fever. They would get an infection. And Ignaz, he noticed that the women who gave birth in the surgical ward had a higher and a greater rate of dying than the women that gave birth in the midwife ward. And he really just was curious on why that was. And so he looked at different ideas. One was he looked as well who's coming to the surgical ward versus who's going to the midwife. And he found out that that was random. It was just every other day. One day, if it was like a Monday, you would go to the surgical ward if you went into labor. If you went in labor on Tuesday, you would go to the midwife. And it got so bad in that hospital that even the women in the community that were pregnant, if they went into labor and it was their day that they had to go to the surgical ward, they would actually prefer to give their baby and have birth in the street or at their own home rather than risk dying at this hospital. Well, long story short, Semmelweis, through the whole process of trying to figure it out, came to the conclusion that the only thing that was different between the surgical ward and the midwife was that the surgical ward performed autopsies, and they had dead bodies there. And through the process, he actually had a friend of one of his doctors that got nicked by a scalpel during an autopsy. One of the students nicked him, and he died shortly after there with an infection. And so he decided that what it was is that there had to be something on the dead bodies that was being transmitted through the hands and the instruments of the doctors to the women that they were giving birth. Because these doctors, medical school students and doctors would actually perform autopsies, use their scalpels and their equipment, and at best they may wipe their hands off on a dirty rag and then went straight in there and gave birth to, did a delivery with a woman without washing their hands. Now, in this society right now, we look back at that and go, that's ridiculous. I mean, come on. Everybody knows that you need to wash hands. But in that day, it wasn't a practice to washing your hands. They lived in a different paradigm. See, the doctors in that day lived in a paradigm that actually disease was caused by bad smells or too much blood in the system. So Semmelweis, he put forth a protocol that every doctor who performed an autopsy, after they did that, they would need to wash their hands and their equipment in a chlorinated lye solution. And the interesting thing is, he got resistance, and they wouldn't do it. They said, no, I mean, it's ridiculous. We cannot pass germs on because we're gentlemen. And gentlemen and scholars don't pass germs. We don't harm our patients. And he got to the point where he actually had to get physical with the doctors. And he set up nurses that would, if a doctor came out of the autopsy, he physically made them wash their hands and clean their instruments before they would touch another patient. Well, the interesting thing is all of a sudden the fevers went down and the death rates came equal to the midwives. But the interesting part of the story is that he still got ridiculed. Many doctors still did not like what he was telling them, that they were causing the disease because they were contaminating the patients. And he kept on trying to push this, and he got to the point where he was fired from that hospital because he was trying to get the doctors basically to wash hands. And long story short, he ended up basically getting committed to an insane asylum where he was beaten, and shortly after he was put in there, he died of sepsis. He died of an infection. The interesting thing is this happened in the early 1800s. President Garfield in 1881, when he was assassinated, he did not die because of the assassin's bullet. It was a very superficial wound. He died because the doctor who was treating him refused to wash his hands, clean his equipment, and clean the wound. And he died of an infection. So the reason why I bring this up is that what I'm going to be talking to you about today is a different paradigm about how happiness comes to us. Where do we really experience our life from? Now, from my journey, I usually always thought that this sense of well-being, this sense of happiness, comes from an outside source. In other words, I will be happy when something happens. In other words, if I made more money, I would become happier. If my relationship with my wife would become better, I would be happier. If whatever happens outside of myself, that brings me happiness and joy. And the same thing's true is I'm going to lose my happiness or my joy if I lose something. In other words, if I didn't make enough money, or if I lost my job, or my spouse left me, or a family member dies, somehow that was going to take away from my happiness. And for me, I found out that that's not true. That happiness isn't a state of doing. It isn't something that you achieve. It's something that's actually innate. It's already inside us. So I would dare say that everything that you want to do to have happiness, joy, have a state of peace of mind, a sense of wellness, to have a wonderful life, is already inside you. That there is nothing to do. And I call this basically the innate gifts that we have as a human being. So how's this resonating to me? Give me like some little emojis or something to say that you're still listening, if it sounds good. And if you want to ask a question, type it in a comment. That would be good, and we'll try to get back to those. But the cool thing about it is that we have innate gifts. Everybody's born to be happy. That is our human condition. See, I used to think that the human condition was just something of struggle and enduring to the end and trying your best to navigate the circumstances of your life so that you could be happy. And every once in a while, through this struggle and this frustration, you'll have glimpses of happiness. You'll have glimpses of well-being. And with the understanding that we're going to be talking about and exploring over the next 8 weeks, I'm going to show you how I came about with understanding that actually, as a human being, it's the opposite. We're designed to be happy. We're designed to have a sense of well-being. We're designed for joy. We're designed for peace. And every once in a while, we have moments of tragedy, moments of frustration. But the majority of our life is happy. So I have a mathematical formula that I would use a whiteboard, but because of the way this works, it would be a mirrored image and it would look really, really funky. But here it is happiness, joy, that sense of well-being equals you. That's who you are as a human being. Not because of anything you've done, but just for the fact that you were born. Because you're human, that is who you are. And when you minus the misunderstandings that take you away from that innate self, that's where the problem is. And the biggest misunderstanding that people have is they really don't know where their experience is coming from life. And what I mean by that is, when you think that your happiness and your well-being and your psychological health, lack of a better word, comes from outside sources, that's kind of the illusion that we've been taught. I mean, I was taught that. It was very evident growing up. I remember parents, "You're making me mad, knock that off." You got to succeed in life, because if you don't succeed, if you don't get good grades, you're not going to be happy. And it's a kind of an illusion that life is an outside-in life, but it is an illusion. It really is an illusion. It actually is an inside-out life. Our happiness, our joy, our well-being comes from within. And the best way that I can explain it as far as a metaphor is look at small children. Small children are the perfect example of this innate quality that we have as a human being. Because you think about it, if a child, especially young children, 1, 2, 3 years old, if their physical well-being is being taken care of, in other words, they don't have pain, they're being fed, they're naturally very happy. They're also very naturally curious. They have a natural sense of well-being. They don't hold grudges. If they do fall into a bad mood, it's very short-lived. I don't know about you, but I've seen kids go into total tantrums and rants, and a second later, they're perfectly fine. Because they understand that maybe they don't understand their innateness, but they're a perfect example of the innateness. And the gifts that the young children have, they don't go away. They just get buried by misunderstanding. Does that make any sense to you? I mean, again, it's kind of hard to interact because we're not interacting, but I hope this makes sense to you. That we have innate health, innate wellness already a part of us. That's who we are as a human being. And so the purpose that I do when I coach people is I don't coach people in how to add more things to do to become happy. It's a subtractive. I take away the misunderstandings of what's causing their experience of life. And again, when you understand that it is an inside-out life, you understand something, that one of the biggest problems I think that people have is that, at least from my experience, is because they forget where their experience is coming from. And there's actually fundamental principles, and these are the principles that we're going to talk about in the next 8 weeks, that there's fundamental principles behind how we operate, how we experience our life. And principles are very, very important. I'm going to feeling like a quote, so I'm going to give you a quote here. I'm going to read it so that I can get it right. But it's from our good friend, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he says, "As to methods, there are millions and then some. But principles are few. The man who grasps principles can successfully select his own methods. The man who tries methods, ignoring principles, is sure to have trouble." See, there's fundamental truths that govern things in our life. They govern things in our physical life, and they also govern things in our non-physical life. So basically, our formless part of our life and our form. Now, happiness, a sense of well-being, that's our formless. It's something that's not tangible. Can't really put, and can't even really describe it. But we have the form. Now, in the form, the principle of gravity. Every human being is born into gravity. And because gravity is a principle, it's a fundamental truth. No human being can escape gravity. Whether you understand or not, the tribal person born in the darkest Africa or non-civilization area doesn't float because he doesn't understand gravity. The principles still apply to him and her, just as they apply to me. But the thing is that when we started getting an understanding of gravity, it opened up the whole area of physics. And we started learning more about how the world in the physical form works. And then all of a sudden we started to understand other principles in the physical form, such as aeronautics. Another good example is that airplanes follow principles of aeronautics. And that's pretty much thrust and lift. There's been no airplane that's ever flown that ignored those principles. And as human beings, we wanted to learn how to fly. And so what we tried to do is we tried to mimic the birds. So a lot of the first flying machines actually were machines that had wings that tried to flap. And it wasn't until the Wright brothers actually started seeing and noticing that the birds, as they're gliding, could actually change their direction by movement of the wings, that the wings were flexible and that they would move back and forth. And so they designed their first airplane with flexible wings, that with pulleys and ropes that they could guide them. And that allowed them to have the lift they needed, to have the air current come underneath and guide the wings. Now, interesting thing about it is once we understood the principles of aeronautics and the basic principles of it, the aeronautic industry exploded. And we went from Kitty Hawk to the moon in less than 70 years. So how does this apply to the mindset of happiness? Well, if we understand the fundamental principles that controls our psychology, that gives us the experience of life, it gives us leverage. It gives us the ability to navigate the circumstances of our lives. And we really truly understand where our experience is coming from. And it's a way of subtracting that misunderstanding. Well, the first principle, we kind of talked about it today, is the innate gifts. It's what we're born with. See, we have a formless energy that we are given at birth. Lack of a better word, it's a birthright. And that innate gift is happiness. It is joy. It is a sense of well-being. It is the ability that we have as a human being to thrive and have a desire to thrive. It's our innateness as a human being to be resilient, to be able to deal with anything that comes to us. No circumstance can take away your well-being. That's a principle. It's a fundamental truth. And my hope is to show you that that is one of the first principles. And to put a metaphor around it or to put words on it, sometimes we call this principle mind. The next principle that we have is we have consciousness and we have also a thing called thought. So in simple terms, the fundamental truth of us being human beings is we are alive, and because we are alive, we have innate gifts. And the reason why we know we're alive is because we have awareness. We have a certain amount of consciousness. And because we have that consciousness and awareness that we're alive, we can tap into those innate gifts. But how we experience our reality and how we experience life is through the principle of thought. I don't think that's something new. I think we all know that thought is something that controls our lives. The best metaphor I can do is think of life as basically a sailboat. We're sailboats, and our job as life is to navigate the ocean, is to go sailing. Now, as a sailboat, the sailboat has three things going for it. One is it has an energy source. That energy source is the wind. It's the thing that if we can tap into the wind, it'll push our boat. In other words, if we can tap into those innate gifts, it will guide us. That's the energy behind life. Now, our sail is like our awareness or our consciousness. And if we know how to maneuver our sail right to capture that wind, we can harness that energy. And that energy will take us and move us along. But we need one more component, which is the rudder. See, the rudder is our thought, not our thoughts. See, thought is what guides us. It's our rudder. It teaches us, it points us to the direction. So if you have thoughts of danger and I don't want to get away from the shore, well, you're going to put your rudder and keep yourself to that shore. But if you tap into those innate gifts, then you know that courage and confidence is something you're born with. And you know that where you go in life really comes down to the quality of your thinking. Now, over this 8 weeks, we're going to really go into an exploration of thought, our awareness, our consciousness, and this innate power, or these innate gifts that we have. So how's that sounding? Does it sound like a fun little trip that we're going to have? I hope some of you are in. Again, if you have any comments or questions, go ahead and ask them. I'll try to answer them. But that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about today, is we have innate gifts. And I'm going to leave you with this. And I want you to think about it for this next week until our next class next Wednesday. Like I said, I'm going to be planning on doing these classes every week at 11 o'clock on Wednesday for at least the next, hopefully 8 weeks, but maybe 6. We just see how everybody's schedules goes. And we're going to continue this exploration of what are the principles that give us our experience of life, and the implications about understanding those principles on how it can actually benefit you, and lack of a better word, and any psychological suffering that you may have. But what I want to leave you with this is that as this week, I want you to ponder, what would your life be like if you really knew on a deep principle level, such as almost on the level that you know that gravity exists level, that you know that you have innate gifts of love, happiness, well-being, resilience, clarity of mind already inside you. And not only that you have those gifts, but every human being that walks on the face of the earth, and who has ever walked on the face of the earth, and whoever will walk on the face of the earth, have those same innate gifts. Would that make a difference in your life? Would that make a difference in your family? So just ponder that this week. What are your innate gifts? And how will they have an impact on your life? Keep the conversation going. Go ahead, ask me questions if you want, and I'll try to get back to you on the Facebook. But gosh, thanks a lot for investing your time in me. I really do appreciate the opportunity to share this with you. Because like I said, I finally got to the point in my life where I truly have a wonderful life. And it has nothing to do with my circumstances. I just know I have a wonderful life. And I've had a lot of just proddings and pushings, you might say, to share my experience. And I just really do want to thank you for allowing me to share that with you, because I do believe it will be worthwhile. So with that, lots of love, and I'll talk to you next week. And keep the conversation going. Go ahead and share this with your friends, because this information is powerful. It's life-changing. Love you lots. And until next week, I'll talk to you later. Bye.